Hogwarts, Muggle Fraudster Outshines Wizards with Deception. Episode 31. Soon, news of Lewis's identity reached Slytherin. At the long table, one of the Slytherin students who were enjoying their meal silently stopped eating and looked at Lewis. And some little wizards who didn't particularly care about the bloodline were eating, and also looked at Lewis, who seemed to be unaware of the change in the atmosphere, wondering how he would react after knowing that his identity was exposed. "So you're a mudblood?" Draco Malfoy, who was sitting next to Lewis, stared at Lewis viciously. "A lowly mudblood like you is not worthy of being my follower. It seems that this guy knows the nobility of pure-blood wizards and wants to blend in. It's disgusting, he's tarnishing the glory of Slytherin. We almost got lied to him." The Slytherin table erupted into heated discussions, and although not everyone had an opinion about Lewis, a Muggle wizard, they had to join the discussion under the influence of classmates, which made the wave even more alarming. Fortunately, there was a prefect in every academy, and in the prefect's warning, those who were most emotional and discussed the most had to quiet down, but from the glances they exchanged, it was clear that they were brewing something. Draco Malfoy and his two henchmen were among them. However, Lewis didn't care, just glanced at the Slytherin head of Slytherin, Severus Snape, in the professor's seat when someone called him mudblood. The professor, who hated hearing the word mudblood the most, was admiring the eyes of his first-love son at this time, apparently not paying attention to the movement here. Those little wizards who called mudblood escaped. However, few people probably know that Severus Snape is particularly sensitive to the word mudblood. Although Lewis did not feel much about the insulting words of wizards, he was not a generous person, and at this time he was already thinking about how to fight back. After feeling the eye contact between you and me at the dinner table, Lewis felt that there was no need to use his brain again, and he could retaliate by the way. "I hope the school rules are not too strict." Lewis took a bite of the tender and juicy steak and looked at the headmaster of the professorial seat. This one was also looking at him at this time, obviously observing his behavior. "It's not wonderful." Lewis shifted his gaze away from Dumbledore, a legendary wizard who excelled at dementoring and was a master dementor who could read each other's thoughts in real time through his eyes. Although the other person is a good person, he will not read other people's thoughts without permission. But Mui has no interest in putting his own interests on the discipline of others. He also relies on wizards to unlock higher-level lotteries and earn fraud points, but he can't be driven away. But just dodging was useless. Lewis hadn't forgotten that he needed to go to the headmaster's office the next day to get up close and personal with the legendary wizard. Lewis's expression did not change, but he was thinking about how to deal with it. Compared to Dumbledore, those little wizards' petty fights are no longer relevant. What I lack now is nothing more than the Muggle identity. The Muggle expulsion curse is too inexplicable for me. I need a way not to be confused by the Muggle expulsion curse. Lewis remained motionless, calm in the knife-like eyes of some of the Slytherin students. Then Lewis quickly thought of a way. Compared with easily misled vision, the detection of mental power is more accurate and comprehensive. Previously on the train, Lewis used the power of the chicken charm to allow his spirit to reach far and find Neville's toad. This distance was enough for a normal Muggle expelling curse. But that method is just a trick and cannot last, and if you want to maintain daily mental detection, Lewis estimates that his mental power needs to be increased to at least twice the current level. But there is no good way for mental power to achieve the strengthening of Lewis instead of vision. He only has an instantaneous strengthening potion of mental power, but that thing is time effective, although it can also weakly enhance mental power after use, but it is too bad to simply use it as a strengthening agent. There is still a lottery. Lewis sighed, looking at his fraud point balance. 2720, a total of only 5 boutique draws can be drawn. Originally, he wanted to wait for a more advanced lottery, but his plan could not catch up with the changes, and now what he needed most was to obtain a permanent spiritual strengthening method through the lottery. Maybe I can try the ordinary level lottery 10 times, so that the probability of drawing spiritual permanent strengthening props is also a little greater. Lewis thought. The normal draw was not to say that it was useless. Lewis had only drawn it once and got a very obvious effect, which initially allowed him to ignore the hand of a mage of the Muggle expulsion type spell. It's just a little bit different in the degree of cherishment. This method works. Lewis wiped his mouth, swallowed the food in his mouth, and waited quietly for the end of the dinner. Wait until these little minions are solved, and then go to the lottery. Lewis paid attention to the unkind gazes around him, originally planning to remember a few faces, but then thought about it. Let's fix it together. It doesn't matter if they do it after that, don't even think about running if one of them counts. Episode 32. A small episode occurred during the course of the dinner. When a group of grey and translucent ghosts came out of the dining table, the floor, and the walls, the young wizards who had just arrived at Hogwarts were scared enough. That's one of Hogwarts' specialties, ghosts. In the magical world, ghosts do exist, but they are not accepted by wizards, even if they are their relatives. Hogwarts is one of the few places in the UK that can accommodate them harmoniously and allow them to live normally. And Hogwarts even allows ghosts to be professors, such as Bean Cuthbert, who teaches the history of magic, is a ghost. He was not small when he died, and after becoming a ghost, he spent a long time at Hogwarts, and he is a living history in itself. Each house has its own resident ghost, and Slytherin is no exception. And one of the ghosts named Barrow the Blood is particularly special. Compared to other ghosts who try to maintain their normal form, this one does not care about his image at all, with a little silver blood on his illusory robe, and empty eyes that are always looking for the figure of someone. His appearance and costume make him look mysterious and terrifying, which is very unreasonable in Lewis's opinion. But no one cared about the appearance and gaze of a ghost, so no one noticed that the terrifying ghost's gaze was always lingering on the Ravenclaw table. "Hey, Barrow the Bloodman, you know what? There's a mud-blood in our academy," a good guy said loudly. There was buzzing conversation and snickering from the long Slytherin table, and some Slytherins seemed looking forward to seeing Lewis intimidated by ghosts. The eyes of Barrow the Bloody were drawn over, and his empty gaze and emaciated face formed a face that was enough to scare a crying child. But Lewis is not a child, he is very calm with the Bloodman Barrow. "Good evening, gentlemen, you don't look very kind." Lewis elegantly sliced the steak in a casual tone, as if the other person was not a terrible ghost, but a diner at the same table. The chef at Hogwarts is quite good, and Lewis is very satisfied. "A Muggle wizard, in Slytherin, do you know what that means?" The bloody man Barrow unexpectedly did not overreact, although his voice was hoarse, but his tone was calm. "You're more polite than I thought." Lewis did not answer his words, but said to himself. "As far as I know, the ghosts who are willing to live in Hogwarts generally have the attitude of blending in, so they pay special attention to their image, even if they occasionally use their horror posture to prank, but they will never appear for long." Lewis wiped his mouth and said calmly, "You don't seem to care much about life at Hogwarts, so why are you staying here?" Bloody Barrow stared at Lewis with empty eyes. "It can't be for someone, can it?" The expression of the Bloodman Barrow instantly became frightened. He felt that he was seen through by a little ghost. Obviously he had never mentioned something to people, but this little ghost punctured his secret with a few words, and he was the biggest shame in his heart. These inexplicable and wonderful words made Draco Malfoy on the side full of doubts. He didn't know why Lewis couldn't hear a word of what he said, let alone why the Bloodman Barrow had a ghostly expression. Lewis just casually glanced at the Bloody Barrow, and said in a kind tone, "If there is nothing to do, just leave. Sorry for saying something that makes you care, but please rest assured that I am only more curious to ask." The ghost body of the Bloodman Barrow was a little unstable, and he took one last look at Lewis and left Lewis's side as if he had fled. There was silence on the long table. No one knew what Lewis and Barrow the Blood Barrow said, let alone why Barrow the Blood fled. All they knew was that Barrow the Blood, the ghost that almost everyone at Hogwarts feared, had lost in front of Lewis in less than a round. "This mudblood looks a little powerful, shall we continue at night?" A little Slytherin wizard who had planned to collectively bully Lewis was somewhat regretful. "Are you afraid?" "Nonsense, aren't you afraid? That's Barrow the Bloody." "Well, I'm also a little scared." Lewis listened to the words that retreated, poured himself a glass of pumpkin juice, and withdrew the mage hand from the ear of Draco Malfoy, who doubted life and kept picking out his ears. Just now, after all, he was talking about the privacy of Barrow the Blood, and although the other party looked terrible, he was not malicious, so Lewis did not expose his private thoughts, so he specially blocked little Malfoy's ears. It seemed like this caused little Malfoy quite a bit of trouble, and he almost thought he was deaf. Fortunately, he took back the mage's hand in time, otherwise this little Malfoy would have cried to find the professor. Episode 33. When the last young wizard put down his knife and fork, the dinner was officially over. The unfinished feast on the table suddenly disappeared without warning, just as it did when they appeared. Dumbledore walked up to the Great Hall and began to announce some notes. The so-called precautions are nothing more than the cliché that night tours are not allowed, that it is not allowed to step into the Forbidden Forest without permission, that magic is not allowed in the corridors, that you want to join a Quidditch team to find, and that it is forbidden to step into the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor. To be honest, this warning sounded no different from instigation, and Lewis clearly noticed the eager appearance of many students. "This year we are welcoming our new defense against the dark arts professor, Quilina's Quirrell." At the end, Dumbledore introduced Quirrell and asked the oddly dressed professor to officially meet the students. Then, led by the old principal, everyone sang the school song together. Lewis really didn't expect this, but this kind of thing didn't bother him, and it was over with his eyes closed and his mouth open without making a sound. At this point, the dinner was officially over, and under the leadership of the prefects of each academy, the young wizards left the auditorium in no order. On the way to the Slytherin common room, Lewis felt a distinct act of isolation, and the students who looked down on Muggle wizards like Lewis had surrounded Lewis with water. It seems that although those students said that they did not dare to teach Lewis a lesson, they would still do something bad if they poked at it. Lewis didn't care about the little things though, he was now more interested in the Slytherin common room. The Slytherin common room is underground, but unlike Hufflepuff, the Slytherin common room is close to the Black Lake and even has a huge glass window with a view of the lake below. It feels like being in an aquarium. Lewis, who had circled around the dormitory, sat on the sofa in the common room, casually put his top hat on the coffee table, and watched the squid in the water outside the window dangle his wrists and feet. Because of the lighting in the lounge, many fish like to run here, so the view is good. Lewis and Draco Malfoy also had a dormitory with his classmates, except for some Slytherin students that Lewis didn't know and didn't want to know. They were beginning a ritualistic, but not entirely pure-blood social, and Lewis was afraid that he would be amused, so he stayed outside to watch the scenery, and waited for any warriors to challenge him. It's not that he has a low laughing point, it's that those social behaviors are too funny. Lewis guesses that those behaviors are 80% of these students' imitation of their parents' actions, which seem immature and serious, like a childish drama. Anyway, Lewis can't stand that look. The lively and active child puts himself under the shell of fixed rules, mechanically imitating those extremely cool behavior actions, essentially the same as imitating Ultraman's cannon in his previous life. But why hasn't anyone come out to trouble me yet? Are they all soft eggs? Lewis yawned, and everything around his body shook slightly. In order to prevent these little wizards from using magic that he did not understand, he specially released the floating power of the chicken charm to assist the spiritual power to probe the surroundings. The consequence of this is that everything around them has a feeling of light fluttering, as if they will float up when touched. But nothing happened. The dormitories of all grades were bustling like a party, and no one came to trouble Lewis. That's right, the shrewd Slytherins are not Gryffindors, and they won't blindly rush to protect themselves. Lewis picked up his top hat and muttered to himself. But this can't work. To be a person must have perseverance, and perseverance, it is not a good habit to give up halfway. Let me teach you. In the dimly lit Slytherin common room, Lewis looked up and watched the handsome face of the dark lake water outside the glass window fade into the dark. What is said counts. The depth of his left eye gradually spread, turning into a thick black mist that wrapped Lewis. Is the most spiritual power to this extent? Not enough. Lewis looked at the dark fog of fantasy wrapped around him, thought for a while, and made a decision. The ring leading to the other space flickered, and a syringe gun with a light blue transparent liquid fell into Lewis's hand, and the needle pierced Lewis's skin to inject the spiritual power instant strengthening potion into his body. It's not a waste to use it now, anyway, there are no side effects and can weakly and permanently strengthen mental power, so it's just right to use it at this time. Under the physical strengthening effect of the Ox charm, his spiritual power was instantly increased by a maximum of 10 times, and the surging spiritual power instantly expanded the scope of the illusion, enveloping the entire Slytherin common room, and even had the tendency to overflow the glass and float towards the Black Lake. The thick dark fog frightened away the huge squid and schools of fish, obscuring the lights of the common room. Simple violence is not in line with the habits of magicians, or is the illusion of fraud and fear more in line with the aesthetic of magic? Lewis walked in the dark, and the black fog that was essentially illusion could not block his vision. But not everyone is qualified to enjoy the gorgeous horror show at the magician's own expense. Lewis muttered to himself and walked upstairs step by step. Episode 34. Upstairs, the young wizards of the Slytherins were unaware of the malicious arrival, and they were trying to forget the Muggle wizard who could scare away the bloody barrow with a few words and focus on their social interactions. Of course, everyone is pure-blood wizards, and many young wizards who know each other because of their families and complicated blood ties have spontaneously formed small groups. Like Draco Malfoy and his two henchmen. Lewis passed by his dormitory and just casually glanced at his roommate, shrouded in invisible black fog, and was not noticed by anyone. Since it is a roommate, you have to be a little taken care of, and finally concoct them. The red light of Lewis's left eye flickered slightly, making his temperament look a little weird. This Sharingan eye was being destroyed by Lewis's soaring spiritual power, and there was a faint feeling that the upper limit of endurance was about to reach the limit. Let's go and clean up the seniors first. Lewis walked through the black fog and disappeared into the corridor. In the room, Malfoy, who was bragging about the strength of his family with his classmates, suddenly shivered, and he looked suspiciously outside the dormitory door, and the light outside the door was still not abnormal. That mudblood hasn't come back yet? He can't be afraid, right? Little Malfoy suddenly had the courage to greet the other roommates. Let's play a prank on him. The surname Malfoy made Draco Malfoy revered because he represented both legitimate and reasonable dignity and symbolic radical dignity. A family of Death Eaters that still exists and grows, and Death Eaters have always been respected in the eyes of pureblood wizards. So little Malfoy was also in the dormitory, and the other little wizards also looked eager to try. "What do you want to do?" they asked. "See his luggage? Let's give him an impressive welcome, put something in his box and make him ugly," Malfoy said with a wicked smile. "Dead rat? Or what bugs? Where do we go to find rats and bugs?" Some people questioned. "It's not common here." "I'm just saying this, don't any of you have that disgusting curse?" Malfoy frowned. "Don't you guys learn to cast spells at home?" Seeing that everyone shook their heads, Malfoy also shook his head. He was disgusted that this Slytherin was so bad. "It seems that he is the leader of this Slytherin class." Malfoy smiled triumphantly, grabbed his wand and walked to Lewis's bed. There were several large boxes of luggage for Lewis, as well as a caged owl with a large size and fierce eyes. At this time, the guy who looked like a strong man among elves was staring viciously at the ill-intentioned Malfoy, and his knife-like eyes seemed to be thinking about how to make a hole in the guy who was close to the owner's luggage. "Fuck off, you beast." Malfoy looked at Fafnir in disgust, smiling triumphantly after confirming that he couldn't get out of the cage. "Just watch in the cage as we teach your mudblood master." Malfoy grimaced, ready to open Lewis's largest suitcase. "Let's see what this lowly mudblood has brought. Will it be full of diapers?" Malfoy scoffed wantonly, causing laughter from the dormitory. No one noticed that the door of the dormitory was shrouded in black fog at some point, and the black fog slowly drifted into the dormitory, as if a terrible monster was stretching out its claws. Well, even if they noticed, they couldn't see it, and before Lewis launched the illusion, the black fog was like a curtain that no one could see through. Unless someone can surpass the tenfold strength in Lewis in mental power. At this moment, Lewis was standing in the doorway, watching with interest as Malfoy scolded himself as he prepared to open his box. "I thought you would be as honest as the senior class. It seems that you are too young, uncalm, and inexperienced." Lewis shook his head as he looked at Malfoy, who didn't know whether he was alive or dead. Lewis had finished cleaning up the Slytherin senior boys, and every dormitory had gone around in circles, and no surprise, none of them had the ability to resist. But none of them were really discussing what to do with Lewis, and the savvy of the Slytherins was evident in them. And the reason for all this is the abnormal reaction of the Bloodman Barrow. This unusual ghost status at Hogwarts is indeed extraordinary. Many people are afraid of him, and when a person in Hogwarts is afraid of the Bloodman Barrow, these senior wizards of Slytherin have given up their plans to deal with Lewis. But Lewis did not let them go, deep enough to sink the illusion to prepare them. After all, now they do not plan to trouble Lewis, does not mean that they will not play in the future. Maybe they will have some isolation in the future, the action of stumbling. If you are stunned first, you will not suffer losses, and you can also earn some fraud points by the way. Using illusions to confuse others, or even intimidate others, this fraud point must not be less. But what Lewis didn't expect was that the most dish, who should have been the most honest in the first grade, actually started to think crookedly, and actually wanted to teach him a lesson. What's even more outrageous is that he plans to open his suitcase. Lewis wasn't going to do it right away, but leaned against the doorframe and watched Malfoy's performance. Episode 35. What do magicians generally put in their own boxes? Probably everything that can be put in. Of course, there is still some personal belongings in it. After all, the magician is also human, and he also needs to put something. Therefore, the magician's daily entanglement is to choose the best, most magical, and most interesting batch of props in his magical props to occupy the limited space freed up from daily belongings. And Lewis is a little more frustrated than the average magician, because he has an unknown amount of storage space. He can put his own items into the ring, and then the box can be filled with all the props he wants. Before arriving at Hogwarts, Lewis had planned to enter Slytherin, and he also thought that someone would trouble him because of this. So all the suitcases he carries are filled with thrillers and funny props. For example, the giant clown scare box. When the lock of the box was opened, and before Malfoy could react, the box was bounced open by a huge force, all the time drawing the white clown costume, and the funny clown half bounced out of the box and crashed into Malfoy's face. At the same time, a miniature mechanical phonograph specially prepared by Lewis, because the electrical appliances within Hogwarts range failed, began to play hysterical laughter. Malfoy slumped to the ground with a scream, and retreated in fright at the sound of that horrible laughter, leaving suspicious traces of liquid on the carpet. Is it scared to pee? Lewis looked at the watermark on the carpet with some disgust. How can this be so? This is everyone's dormitory. Don't you let everyone smell your urine when they sleep at night? Louis strongly condemns this immoral act. So it's not too much to send him a nightmare, right? The black mist appeared, and the illusion blinded everyone's senses in an instant. In their consciousness, the huge clown half seemed to come to life, grinning with an exaggerated mouth, showing uneven yellow teeth. It jumped off the spring base and chased every student in the dormitory with a crazy smile. It is powerful, cruel, and ruthless, and the spell is ineffective against it, and even if it is destroyed, it can still be restored instantly. Every student in the dormitory was caught up in this hallucination. They were running in the hallucination, but their bodies were motionless in reality, with frightened to distorted expressions on their faces. It is worth mentioning that each of them has independent illusions, that is, in the hallucination, except for themselves, the other companions are hallucinations, and those hallucinatory companions will die at any time, adding a bloody atmosphere to the illusion, or turning into clowns and staging thrillers. It might be a little too cruel for you, but who told me to be careful? Lewis shrugged and began to pack his own box. This thing is not a one-time, it can still scare a lot of people. Lewis plans to disguise it as a treasure on Halloween and make a plausible treasure map to throw for others' fun. After packing up the boxes, Lewis fed the angry Fafnir 2 more pieces of dried rats, and then took a blanket to go to the common room to rest for the night. At the very least, I have to wait for the smell of the dormitory to disperse for a day before moving in. Good night, gentlemen, I hope you have a good dream. Lewis bowed to the little wizards who were standing where they were, their bodies twitching their bodies in response to their nerves, before closing the door and leaving. Lewis wasn't worried that the illusion show would leave a psychological wound on the little ones. He thought he was a gentleman with a conscience. He sets a ceiling on reincarnation and fear for illusions, ensuring that these young wizards do not end illusions prematurely because they are killed in illusions, and do not become crazy because of excessive fear. Then there's the final memory shield, and in order to keep these young snakes with a healthy childhood, Lewis deletes their memories of illusion at the end of the illusion. They only remember the fear, but they don't know what they are afraid of. Maybe it will show something when you meet the boggart. Lewis touched his left eye while talking to himself, and the slight burning sensation and instability made him feel that the Sharingan eye seemed to be a little useless. It's a replica after all. Lewis muttered quietly. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at the road leading to the girls' dormitory, which did not notice anything going on this side of the boys' dormitory, and still maintained a lively atmosphere. The social scene over there may not be as simple as here. Forget it, after all, it's girls, save them some face, and it's not good for me to go in like this. Well, the reputation is not very good. Lewis didn't expect tonight's events to be hidden from the Hogwarts professors and headmasters, and although the portrait in the common room did not see Lewis under the cover of illusion, it would definitely be exposed during class tomorrow. Those students who have been intimidated by illusion for one night, can you expect him to get up the next day for class? Are you kidding? At that time, as the only Slytherin boy active in the castle in the morning, even the fool knew that this matter had nothing to do with him. Since this is the case, it is necessary to cherish the feathers, even if it is such a thing as breaking into the girls' dormitory at night. If this crime is fixed, he is afraid that he will die twice. Once in the wizarding world, the other would happen with the school letter in the Muggle world, at the hands of his parents. He couldn't afford to lose this man. Half lying on the sofa in the common room and confirming that no one was entering or leaving the dormitory, Louise, who was looking at the view of the lake bottom outside the glass window, lazily launched the lottery. It is still 2,720 fraud points, and this time the point reward should be settled the next day, so Lewis does not plan to wait, and directly spends 2,700 points for a normal lottery. As the starlight flashed, 27 silver starlights fell on Lewis's hand, and after the light dissipated, various items appeared, and their specific information also flowed into Lewis's brain at the same time. Episode 36. This ordinary lottery, a total of 27 times. You obtained miscellaneous items, precious jade *5, T-virus stock solution *3, worn leather boots *1, blue and white stripes with suspicious dirt fat G *1. You obtained medicines, medical aloe vera *3, black jade intermittent ointment *5. You have obtained the enhancement class, soul enhancement pill *3, one-time avatar experience ticket *1. You get a special class, best sword in the village *1, best sword in the town *1, best sword in the city *1, best sword in the country *1, sword of the demon king *1. Because there are many one-time draws, the rewards drawn are more messy. Lewis expressionlessly blew off the fat and worn leather boots with suspicious dirt with Dragon Yin, turned his head and carefully threw the sealed ampoule containing the T-virus stock into the corner of the storage space. Why did this special lottery take out everything to illuminate, and Fat G took it out for fear that he would not be regarded as a pervert? And why does something as dangerous as the T-virus stock come out of the ordinary lottery? Did you get this thing leaked? Lewis doesn't want to play Resident Evil in this world. Disposing of dangerous goods and reputation-threatening garbage, Lewis began to sort out other rewards. The first thing to notice is the 5 Western-style one-handed swords that are particularly eye-catching. No way, these 5 swords are clearly placed together and look like a series, eye-catching and the same as their names. Even if there is a good sword in the village, how can there be a good sword in the town and a good sword in the country? The level division is quite strict. Lewis casually drew a national good sword. The best sword in the country, located in a country, it acquires the ability to slash everything, but loses this ability when fighting against the sword of the Demon King. Is it really a series? Lewis thought about it and picked up the Demon King sword again. Demon King sword, the strongest sword, no matter where you are, will gain the ability to slash nothing, giving the user the body of an immortal Demon King, but will lose its special ability when fighting against the best sword in the village. Lewis was silent for a long time, picked up the other swords in turn, and sighed after reading their introductions. Play Colosseum with me here? This series of swords are all within a certain range to obtain the ability to slash nothing, and then from the Demon King to the country to the village and turn to restraint. The country cuts the city cuts the town cuts the village, and the result is that the village also restrains the Demon King. The question is, what is the use of this thing? Well. Lewis touched his chin and suddenly had an idea. Give the Demon King's sword to Voldemort, and then the Marakashi sword. Harry Potter? No, that's not interesting, it's just going with fate, it's better to give it to Neville. Lewis thought about it but felt that something was wrong. Although it was Harry who blew up Voldemort in the Harry Potter finale, Neville and Harry seemed to be equal in the prophecy. So is letting Neville defeat Voldemort a resign to fate or a break of fate? Lewis was a little tangled. The main thing is that he does not dare to bet. Voldemort's death is definitely the purpose of reaping his own lottery, a feast with the largest number of fate points, and if he misses it, he will. Huh? Why should I default to Voldemort's mortality? Lewis touched his chin, it's good to continue to survive. Since this is the plan, then put away the village sword first, and look for an opportunity to give the Demon King's sword to Voldemort. The body of the immortal Demon King, epic strengthening. Lewis temporarily put the series of good swords into the space and continued to look at other items. The precious jade is the kind of large, warm-color mutton fat jade, each piece is square and square, looking like artificial. I don't know how much this thing is worth, but it's of little use to Lewis now, so I put it in the space for the time being to eat ash and take it out when needed. Then there are the medicinal medical aloe vera and black jade intermittent ointment. These two, one from the captive of anime cuisine, and the other from the world of Jin Yang's martial arts, are the kind of good wound medicine that can treat serious wounds. The old way, Lewis can't use it, so leave it for emergencies. After that, there is a one-time stand-in experience voucher. Lewis might be happy if this thing were permanent, but a permanent stand-in can't appear in a normal lottery, at least in a boutique. The avatar comes from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and the name Dior Brando comes from the same world. It is a kind of spiritual entity that ordinary people cannot see, and only those who are also the avatar messenger can see the substitute. However, although the avatar is composed of spirits, it can affect other items, and they generally have fantastic abilities, which are not much less than the magic of this world. What's more, who doesn't want to experience the joy of a 9-foot man coming out of the back and giving an oiler meal to the enemy? But if it is one time, this experience ticket is an entertainment item, and he has not forgotten the main purpose of his lottery. Soul Enhancer Pill. Lewis picked up a small porcelain bottle and poured out 3 round pills from it. Soul Enhancement Pill. Peiyuan solidifies the essence, nourishes the soul with the body, and enhances a small amount of spiritual strength. Episode 37. After all, it is something that comes out of an ordinary lottery, and the effect will not be too good, so there will be a small amount word. Lewis was not disgusted, and after making sure that there were no precautions for taking it, he swallowed the 3 pills, and then leaned on the sofa and closed his eyes. The medicinal power dissolved, and the mild medicinal power nourished Lewis's mental power, and the exhaustion caused by the injection of the potion and the extremely expensive illusion also quickly faded. After sleeping until 6 o'clock the next day, Lewis opened his eyes and stretched. In one night, he had completely digested the 3 pills, but he did not have the kind of uncontrollable performance after his strength increased greatly. Lewis felt it, and now his spiritual power can be slightly separated from the body by about 3 meters, which is the combined effect of the instant strengthening potion and the 3 soul enhancement pills. But the duration was still not enough. Lewis had to rest for a few seconds every 10 minutes of use, although the interval was short, but it was not enough for Lewis. No matter, go visit the castle first, and then prepare for class. Lewis briefly washed up and looked at the quiet Slytherin common room, where no one got up. It's a morning at the time of the day, it's a waste not to get up at this time. Lewis is talking about the girls, the boys don't have to think about it, this 80% have to lie down in bed and wake up after class in the morning. Leaving the common room, the first thing Lewis had to face was the problem of not knowing the way. Hogwarts Castle is huge, and in order to prevent Muggle persecution, there were also movable stairs in the castle, and if you miss the stairs if you don't pay attention, you may have to go around for more than 10 minutes to return to your original position. Lewis stood on the stairs and watched as the stairs leading to the auditorium turned to another location that led to another unknown location. Lewis didn't fly over with a chicken charm, anyway, he just hung out. Where is it different? Lewis found that the staircase was so long that it almost led to the top floor of the castle, and by the time he stopped, he had reached a bronze statue of an eagle's head. It may not be accurate to say that it is a bronze statue, and there is a door knocker hanging under it. This image seems to have been heard somewhere. Lewis stared at the eagle-headed bronze statue, and suddenly found that the bronze statue came alive and opened its mouth to speak. Is there a phoenix first or a fire first? Sure enough, it was the Ravenclaw common room entrance. Ravenclaw differs from other houses in that you don't need a password to enter the common room of the house. It welcomes everyone who has wisdom to visit. As long as you answer the riddle correctly, you can enter the Ravenclaw common room. The question just now is that riddle. Phoenix and fire? Lewis looked at the bronze statue of the eagle head. It should be a fire first, that is one of the foundations of the world, but the phoenix is not. The eagle head was silent for a while, as if he did not expect Lewis's answer to be like this, and was silent like this for more than 10 seconds before it slowly said, "It makes sense." With a crunch, the door opened to reveal the stairs leading to the Ravenclaw common room. But Lewis didn't plan to go inside. He answered the riddle just a little curious about the bronze statue of the eagle head. He still had to go to the auditorium for breakfast. Just as he was about to turn away, a figure rushed down the stairs and crashed headlong into Lewis's chest. Fortunately, it was the power of the spell to lay the foundation, otherwise this high and low would send him away. Hermione, be careful. Lewis recognized the person who rushed out at a glance and quickly helped her. Lewis? Hermione looked up and was startled to see Lewis's face close at hand. Only then did she find herself plunged into Lewis's arms, and quickly stood up with a red face. Why are you here? Oh, I'm wandering around to familiarize myself with the castle layout, so as not to find a teacher in class. Lewis said, what are you going to do in such a hurry? Same as you. Hermione still had too blush on her face, but I woke up late and was a little worried that I wouldn't have time to look around. You're too nervous. Lewis's biological clock is very accurate, whereas a magician always likes to subconsciously time it's not yet 7 o'clock. You have enough time. What class are you going to take today? Potions in the morning and transfiguration in the afternoon. What about you? Hermione asked. Mine is the opposite of you. Lewis was a little helpless. At the mention of this, Hermione became angry. Why don't you come to Ravenclaw? She asked, looking at Lewis with some concern. I'm sure you can, but you must have asked the Sorting Hat to sort you into Slytherin. Why? They didn't bully you last night, did they? I think you should have more confidence in me. Maybe I bullied them. Lewis laughed. Let's talk as we go. Let's go to the auditorium for breakfast first. The two walked side by side on the stairs, waiting for the stairs to turn. If only you really bullied them. Hermione snorted softly. Do you want to go to the library together during your lunch break? I heard that the library here is large and there are many magic books that are not available or allowed to be sold outside. Maybe not during the lunch break, or after class in the afternoon. I'm going to visit Headmaster Dumbledore during the lunch break. Lewis said. That's fine, but why are you going to see the headmaster? I heard that Headmaster Dumbledore is the greatest mage in Britain. Hermione said in amazement, I really want to see this old wizard up close. It's for my admission. You may not know, I almost missed the entrance, because the owl didn't send me a letter. Lewis said. Didn't send you a letter? Oh my god, then how did you know about Hogwarts? Did they remedy it in time? Hermione said in amazement. No, I took the initiative to find them, but I know that I was born extraordinary. Lewis wasn't lying. Actually, when we first met that day, I hadn't been to Diagon Alley, nor had I been in contact with any other wizards. Then you. Hermione froze for a moment, recalling the events of the day, but you seemed to know the wizarding world very well at the time. Because I noticed the presence of wizards for a long time. Lewis said softly. This is something that no one else notices. Then why are you telling me? Because I don't lie to my friends, and it's not something too secret. Lewis had a smile in his eyes. Episode 38. However, even the phrase, don't lie to your friends, is a lie. The reason why Lewis took the initiative to raise the issue of time difference with Hermione was to prevent unnecessary trouble after being punctured. Instead of letting the clever Hermione take the initiative to find out more problems, it is better to puncture and make this matter psychologically disappear from Hermione's heart with a true lie. What kind of problems will disappear forever? Naturally, it has been answered. Sooner or later, Harry Potter will have a relationship with Hermione, and the process and time of Lewis entering Diagon Alley cannot withstand scrutiny, and deliberately concealing it will only arouse suspicion, so it is better to break it. In this way, the secret will sink, which can also be regarded as a kind of darkness under the lamp. Lewis and Hermione arrived at the Great Hall. It was just 7 o'clock, but wizards had already gathered in the Great Hall for breakfast. The long table is filled with an unlimited variety of breakfasts, made by Hogwarts house elves. House elves, a special creature enslaved by wizards, are in the kitchen, and after making the perfect meal, they magically deliver it directly to the long table in the auditorium for students to enjoy. At the sight of Lewis's hand, the wizards of the other academies had wonderful expressions. No one will forget this daring fellow, a Muggle wizard daring to set foot in Slytherin, which in itself is enough to be recorded in the history of the school, and some good deeds even say that Slytherin is crawling out of its grave angrily. However, these people's expressions became even more surprised when they saw that there was nothing discordant about Lewis. At this time, a boy with an extraordinary appearance and a Hufflepuff emblem on his body walked over. "Looks like you didn't clash with your roommate last night." The boy smiled sunnily. "Introduce myself, my name is Cedric Diggory, a third year at Hufflepuff College." "Hello, Mr. Diggory." Lewis politely responded, "My name is Lewis Wilson, and this is my friend, Hermione Granger, and she is an intelligent Ravenclaw." "Of course I know your name, and now there's probably no one in the school who doesn't know you as a warrior," Cedric said with a smile, greeting Hermione again. "Good morning, Miss Granger." "Hello." Hermione admitted that the boy in front of her was very eye-catching, not much worse than Lewis. The only drawback may be the sunlight, as if you can see through it at a glance, and Lewis's mysterious style is incomparable. Cedric nodded to Hermione, then turned to Lewis and said, "How was last night?" "It's okay, they were peaceful last night and didn't bother me," Lewis said casually. "He slept quite peacefully, and he still smokes." Cedric felt that Lewis's peaceful description seemed a little strange, but he didn't care. He cared more about the Muggle wizard who had chosen Slytherin. "Call me Cedric, I'll call you Lewis," Cedric said. "Actually, I'm a little curious about you. Can you ask why you chose Slytherin? You know the situation in Slytherin compared to your firm choice. The Sorting Hat respects individual wishes, and most upperclassmen know that it must be his own decision for a Muggle wizard like Lewis to get a Slytherin." Lewis spread his hands after hearing this. "Okay, Cedric, I know you're curious, but my friends and I haven't eaten yet." "Oh, sorry." Cedric showed an apologetic expression. "It's okay, if you don't mind, you can talk while eating. Have you eaten it?" Lewis picked a seat with Hermione and glanced at today's breakfast. Bacon, sausages, omelets, fried eggs, served with some tomato mushrooms as a side dish. The main dish is toast bread and some beans, and the drink is milk and some cereal to eat. Very hearty, but Lewis is really a little tired. Eating English breakfast for more than 10 years now, he prefers to eat fried tofu brain. Maybe you can meet up with the Hogwarts house elves, they should enjoy working, and teach them some oriental food should be fine. Lewis thought as he smeared jam on his toast. "Lewis, please hand me the butter jar," Hermione said as she sat beside Lewis. "Give." Lewis handed it over casually, and the atmosphere between the two was quite harmonious. Beside the two, Cedric stirred the cereal juice in the bowl a little uncomfortably, and he had eaten breakfast, just to sit next to the two less awkwardly, so he took another cereal. Lewis sandwiched bacon and sausages to the toast, made a sandwich, chewed it slowly, and said to Cedric when he finished the sandwich and had it in his stomach, "You just want to ask me why I chose Slytherin?" "Yes, I want to be friends with Miss Granger and you are obviously a good fit for Ravenclaw, but you chose Slytherin, and the reason for this is a little puzzling to me." Cedric smiled. "It can't be for those Slytherin family circumstances." "Of course not, your idea is dangerous." Lewis took a sip of milk. "I just think it's too bland to go to other houses, it might be more exciting to go to Slytherin." "Ah, this?" Cedric was stunned. Lewis is a magician, maybe he needs some stimulation to inspire him. Hermione was half guessing, half fooling Cedric. "Well said, Hermione, you really know me." Lewis smiled, not denying Hermione's answer. In fact, Lewis only entered Slytherin with the intention of trying to fool the rules of Slytherin, and any of the other three houses. Louise felt that he had some corresponding qualities, but in Slytherin, he had characteristics that could not be erased no matter how fitting. He was a Muggle wizard. But alas, it was of no use. The moment he entered the school, he had already fooled the school rules. He had entered Hogwarts as a wizard, and it was normal for him to enter no matter which house he entered after that. At this time, there was an ineffective scam that did not even have an audience, only the magician stood on the stage alone and shouted, and the embarrassing scene could be imagined. At this time, unless Lewis blew himself up as a muggle, he wanted to rely on similar tricks to earn fraud points. I'm done eating, Cedric, Hermione and I go first. Lewis waited until Hermione had almost eaten before swallowing the last piece of food, and he stood up to say goodbye to Cedric. He is in the 3rd grade, he is a 1st grade, and he can't meet it in class. Okay, Cedric finished the cereal juice from his bowl, you can call me if you need help. Cedric didn't mean anything, he simply felt that a muggle wizard who went to school in Slytherin was unique. If you have the chance. Lewis waved his hand and left. Just kidding, how could there be this opportunity, so that the group of little snakes can't do anything about themselves? Episode 39. After breakfast, Lewis and Hermione wandered around the castle until almost 8 o'clock before parting. Be careful, Severus Snape, the professor of potions, is the head of Slytherin, and I heard that he has never added too much to the outer house, so be careful that he finds a reason to deduct your points. Lewis instructed before separating. He doesn't sound like a good teacher. Hermione said with a frown. Indeed, but he is a professor, and we can't help it. Lewis spread his hands. The two agreed to have lunch together before they left separately. Lewis returned to the Slytherin common room, grabbed his textbook wand and top hat and prepared for class. Good morning, everyone. Well, since everyone has not woken up, then I wish you a good dream. Lewis pinched his nose and said a happy goodbye to the roommates who fell to the ground in the dormitory and finally entered the dream. The first class that came to Hogwarts was Transfiguration, and the professor was the serious and well-known vice-headmaster, Minerva McGonagall. When Lewis pushed the door in, there were already students seated. It's just that they are all quiet, even if there is no professor here. Well, maybe the professor is in the classroom. Lewis looked up and saw the tabby cat sitting at the lectern. Good morning, Professor. Lewis took off his top hat and saluted the tabby cat. The tabby cat's eyes were a little surprised, and it gently jumped to the ground and turned into the shape of a witch. Mr. Wilson, your powers of observation are impressive. Professor McGonagall praised Slytherin plus 5 points. Thank you so much for your generosity. Lewis replied politely. He has a good sense of Professor McGonagall, and although this professor is strict, he treats everyone equally, rewards and punishments are clear, and he can be said to be a well-deserved second-in-command at Hogwarts. Much better than a certain potions professor with a crooked position. But you can't wear fancy dress in school, Mr. Wilson. Professor McGonagall said sternly, your hat is out of place. You're right, I'll put it away. Lewis pulled his wand out of his robe and tapped on his top hat. With a bang, a ball of light appeared from the top of the wand and shook everyone's eyes, and when everyone looked at it again, the top hat that didn't look like it could be hidden at will had disappeared. As you wish. Lewis put away his wand and, under Professor McGonagall's surprised gaze, took the book and sat down. A heated discussion broke out in the Transfiguration teacher, and both the Slytherin girls and most of the Gryffindor students were amazed by the scene. You fooled 13 underage wizards and the experienced, sensitive and suspicious adult wizard Minerva McGonagall with simple magic tricks. Inconsequential fooling. You earned fraud points, 2,300 points. Current fraud points, 2,320 points. With a little magic, you can quickly return blood and make up for the supplies spent in the lottery, and there is nothing better than this. What Lewis just performed is just a very ordinary magic trick. The top hat is actually supported by a foldable metal skeleton and cardboard, and only needs to open the joints of the key support points to quickly fold and receive it under the wide robe. This little magic trick does not need to use storage space at all. Professor McGonagall frowned and recalled Lewis's actions just now, racking her brain and not thinking out what magic Lewis had just used. She knew that Lewis, this guy, could not use magic at all. With a moment to go, Lewis removed the inkwell quill from his seat and placed the textbook in his hand on the table. Guide to Transfiguration for Beginners. This is a textbook of transfiguration spells used in the 1st grade, which explains the casting process and precautions of transfiguration spells from shallow to deep, and a larger section is devoted to introducing the serious consequences of abusing transfiguration spells. Lewis has already memorized the entire book, and the above cases are creepy, such as using the transfiguration charm to become a magical creature, and then the consciousness will be distorted or even unwilling to change back. In addition to these, the book also introduces the advanced use of transfiguration charms, such as the transformation charm, turning one item into another. The two do not need to be connected, the disappearing charm, directly turning the item into nothing, and the activation charm, allowing the dead to show the ability to move. In general, the transfiguration charm is a very versatile magic that can definitely benefit wizards when learned well. It can be seen from Teacher McGonagall and Headmaster Dumbledore, both of whom were promoted from the Transfiguration Professor, but this also shows that the difficulty of the Transfiguration charm is not low. But what does its difficulty have to do with Lewis? He couldn't learn if he was a Muggle anyway. But if I can be a Transfiguration Professor. Lewis fell into a fantasy, and time passed minute by minute in the process. As class time approached, there was still a large empty area of students on Slytherin's side, which caused Professor McGonagall's displeasure, but she didn't say much. After all, it was normal for new students to get lost at Hogwarts. So she turned into a cat again, squatting on the desk. Maybe this form is really comfortable, thought Lewis, who had the monkey charm. There was a chance that he also wanted to try what it was like to change into a cat. At this moment, the teacher's door was pushed open, and two young boys broke in. Phew. Fortunately, the professor hasn't come yet. Ron looked around the classroom, relieved. Why are there so many empty seats? Harry looked around and saw that most of the people he saw were familiar faces in the house, while the girls on the Slytherin side were there, but the boys had only one acquaintance, Lewis. Hey, that guy can actually get up. I thought those Slytherins would beat him out of bed. Ron said with a smile when he saw Lewis. Hearing him say this, Harry's brows jumped and he looked at the empty Slytherin seat. Looking at the situation, I don't know who beat who can't get out of bed. Ron relaxed when he saw that there was no professor, and that there were other students who were late, and he looked around and saw the cat crouching on the podium. Hey, how can there be a cat here? As soon as the words fell, the cat jumped up, and once again, the living person scared Harry and Ron enough. Mr. Weasley, and Mr. Potter, you're late. Professor McGonagall stared at the two, her sharp gaze as if she was going to pierce him twice. I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall, the stairs in the hallway are changing so fast that we didn't pay attention and had to take a detour. Harry said with some grievance. You can go out early, maybe I should turn you into pocket watches so you can remember the time. Professor McGonagall reprimanded, Gryffindor deducts 5 points, one person 5 points. Professor. Harry exclaimed, this buckle is 10, you are in debt before it opens, so don't you are the head of Gryffindor, Professor? You're too unkind to deduct points, aren't you? Episode 40. But Professor McGonagall is also selfless, with an iron face and no sand in his eyes, and it is impossible for his subordinates to show mercy. But before Harry could get upset, Ron pushed his arm and pointed to the empty seats, to gloat. Professor, what should those Slytherin people do if they are late? Ron asked loudly. At these words, the Slytherin girls suddenly stared at Ron like knives, and they couldn't wait to tear him alive. Only the culprit, Lewis the thief, calmly wrote and drew on the book, adapting to the writing feel of the quill pen. It is foreseeable that he will have to write with a quill regularly for the next 7 years, which is indeed very retro, but it is also too troublesome to dip in ink while writing. Of course, each of them has 5 points deducted and they are all locked up. Speaking of the Slytherins who hadn't come yet, Professor McGonagall was even more angry. Mr. Wilson, you should be in the same dormitory, do you know where those people are going? Professor McGonagall asked patiently. Although she was angry, it was not Lewis who made the mistake, so she showed patience. Sorry, Professor, I only know that they were all sleeping when I left the dormitory. Lewis replied honestly. Sleep? Professor McGonagall's eyes were breathing fire. On the first day of school, you actually slept in the Sioux dormitory? It took Professor McGonagall a long time to calm her anger, and she asked Harry and Ron to return to their work, because with Slytherin as company, they didn't look a little weak-hearted, but Ron had a feeling of raising his eyebrows because he mentioned Slytherin to punish them. Start the lesson. Professor McGonagall collected her emotions and did not delay the lesson. Does anyone know about transfiguration charms? If Hermione was still in Gryffindor, she must have raised her hand and jumped at this point, right? Old God, Lewis thought while sitting. He wasn't going to help the Slytherin get points, how could he earn back the points he deducted? He wants others to. Who would have thought that Professor McGonagall, seeing that no one raised her hand, would start ordering people herself? Doesn't anyone want to answer? Take Mr. Wilson, you answer. Lewis stood up helplessly out of the corner of his eye. The transfiguration charm is a profound magic that can turn an object into another object, and can also make the transformation between creatures and objects, and the classification of transfiguration charms has the basic rules of transformation of the transformation charm, the disappearing charm, the activation charm, and the transfiguration curse. Lewis opened his mouth and began to endorse, and in a few moments, Professor McGonagall finished today's lesson. Good, stop. Professor McGonagall hurriedly called, well said, Slytherin, +10. Thank you very much, Professor McGonagall. Lewis nodded and sat down. Mr. Wilson explained the knowledge of the transfiguration charm very thoroughly, and even explained the precautions in detail. Professor McGonagall paused, finding that she had nothing more to say, and asked her to repeat Lewis's words again. She couldn't pull her face down, so she had no choice but to teach spells and gestures first, and then took out a matchbox and sent a matchbox to everyone. Now let's try the simplest transfiguration charm and try to turn this match into a needle. Professor McGonagall said, "You guys try it here, don't walk around, I'll leave for a while." Professor McGonagall said and left in a hurry. Of course she wasn't angry because Lewis had finished his knowledge, she was worried that something might happen to the Slytherin students. In the classroom, the students looked at each other and began to try to turn matches into needles. The learning of magic is also gradual, because the magic of the HP series is idealistic, so self-confidence is also very important. Therefore, the professors of transfiguration charms often start with matches to needles, and the outrageous transformation of this substance seems to be a fantasy to Muggles, but it is common in the eyes of wizards. Muggle wizards, on the other hand, are mostly slowed down by the constraints of daily common sense, unless the Muggle wizard is a genius or he doesn't believe in science. In general, this kind of magic first needs to be believed in by oneself, before it can be made a reality. At this time Lewis's own opinion. The little wizards here are all capable, and although they did not completely turn the matches into needles on the first attempt, they did make some changes in the matches, which made the young wizards very excited and hard to try. Lewis is not so troublesome, he directly casts illusions, so that the match has the shape of a needle, no matter who will only think that his magic has succeeded. Even if you check it carefully, you are not afraid, and the illusion can simulate the touch and ensure the authenticity. But now Lewis's mind is no longer in class, and after completing the illusion, he is waiting for the system's prompt. Professor McGonagall is out, and should soon find Professor Snape to find the Slytherin boys who are still lying in the dormitory, and then another fraud point will be paid. Episode 41. At this time, Potion's classroom. Severus Snape waved Hermione, who had just finished answering the question, to sit down. "You're right, but your desire to perform is too strong." Snape's voice was unhurried, and the tone was erratic. Simply put, it was a bit of yin and yang, but he always spoke like this, and he was not aimed at anyone, so everyone else, why don't you write this down? He turned and walked towards the podium, not meaning to give Ravenclaw any extra points. Hermione sat down a little unwillingly. The air pressure in the classroom was a little low, and all the students kept their heads down for fear of being targeted by this serious professor. Students from other schools who came to Snape's class were taught a common sense by their seniors. Don't expect to get any extra points in Snape's class. If you can try not to behave, do not seek merit but seek no fault. Hermione was a little unbelieving, and took the initiative to raise her hand to answer Snape when he asked a question, and then she realized Snape's unreasonableness. Let's continue to talk about the treatment and application of aconitum. Snape opened his textbook and was about to continue lecturing when suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Snape looked up and was surprised to find that it was actually the head of Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall. "Severus, trouble come out." Professor McGonagall knocked on the door with a serious expression. "You guys, study for now." Seeing this, Snape understood that something must have happened, beckoned the students to read their own books and walked out. "Professor McGonagall, what's going on?" Snape asked. "It's your house, students." Professor McGonagall had a worried look on her face. "I went to the other classrooms and all the male Slytherin students didn't show up, except Mr. Wilson." "Wilson? That wizard from a Muggle family?" Snape's eyelids jumped. Did he say something happened? "No, he said the students were still sleeping before he left." Professor McGonagall frowned. "You think he's suspicious in himself?" Snape couldn't maintain his usual tone either. "Call Mr. Filch, let's go to the dormitory first." "I mean that too." Professor McGonagall nodded. The two headmasters called Argus Filch, the squib janitor of Hogwarts, to the Slytherin common room, and when they arrived at the dormitory, they were surprised to see that the boys of all grades in Slytherin were lying horizontally on the floor of their respective dormitories. "What's going on here?" Professor McGonagall was so enraged that she almost thought that the group of students had burped, and her face turned white with anger. Snape didn't panic too much. He checked the students and quickly came to a conclusion. "Don't worry, Professor McGonagall, they're just asleep." Snape examined Draco Malfoy's body intensively, frowning at the smell of urine. He took out his wand and pointed it at little Malfoy. "Recover quickly." At this time, the counterspell of the coma curse can make people wake up quickly. The effect of the spell was so good that little Malfoy immediately opened his eyes, and before he could see the person in front of him, he let out an almost screaming pleading, "Don't eat me." Then he fainted again. Snape frowned and turned back to Professor McGonagall. "It looks like we'll have to ask Madame Pomfrey to check them up, and I need to ask Mr. Wilson what happened. You fooled 34 underage wizards with subtle illusions and terrifying scenes. This will leave them with a deep enough psychological shadow. You earned fraud points, 17,000. Current points, 19,320. The system's prompt finally arrived, and Lewis's fraud points reached an unprecedented level of nearly 20,000. Even if it was a boutique lottery, it could be drawn 38 times. It's a pity that this large-scale illusion is too stressful for the Sharingan, and the mental power required is also very high, and more importantly, this illusion is wasted. Even with the process of deleting memories, this torturous illusion will leave a hidden danger for the target. Unless Lewis intends to turn all 7 Slytherin boys into fools or crazy people, it is best not to use it a second time. However, this large-scale horror illusion did not give an achievement or open the next level of lottery, and I don't know what requirements must be met to open it. Lewis thought to himself. Just as Lewis was pondering this important question, a man sneaked up to Lewis and sat in the seat next to him. It's Harry Potter. Lewis. Harry was a little surprised to see the needle in front of Lewis that was barely flawed, and asked in a low voice, "How did you do it?" "Huh? Believe that you can, don't think about how incredible a match needle is." Lewis glanced at Harry. "It's not a transfiguration charm that is too difficult to ask." "Is that so?" "Thank you for the experience." Harry thanked and hesitated. "Just say something," Lewis said. "You're not here to ask about transfiguration charms." That's right." Harry was a little embarrassed to be punctured. "I'm just a little curious. Did something happen to the Slytherin side yesterday?" He actually wanted to ask Lewis what happened to the Slytherin boys, but it felt a bit provocative to ask, so he changed the euphemism. Everyone was actively making friends and socializing, but in the end they didn't get up because they played too late. Lewis said seriously, "That's it." Harry clearly didn't believe it, but he couldn't say anything, because Lewis clearly looked like he wasn't going to tell him. Just as Harry was thinking about how to continue asking, Professor McGonagall returned. "Mr. Wilson, please come out." Professor McGonagall glanced at the classroom, her gaze slightly condensed, and a questioning gaze from the professor fell on Harry. "Mr. Potter, please explain why you left your seat during class." Professor McGonagall said word by word. "To suffer." Harry immediately realized that if he had no reasonable explanation for the fact that he would have to deduct points again, he would be deducted twice today and become a sinner. My transfiguration charm has never gotten better, so I want to ask Mr. Wilson for help." Harry was very glad that he had just made an excuse to talk to Lewis. "Is it? Mr. Wilson?" Professor McGonagall cast a skeptical gaze on Lewis. "Basically, it is." Lewis looked at Harry's pleading gaze and nodded, telling the truth. Professor McGonagall came over and was a little surprised to see the needle on Lewis's desk. "Well done, Mr. Wilson, you can indeed give Mr. Potter some experience. You have a perfect needle, Slytherin, plus 5 points. Another plus." Lewis nodded helplessly. "Thanks, Professor McGonagall." Episode 42. "Mr. Wilson, we would like to hear from you the details of last night," Snape said, staring at Lewis. In Snape's office, the 2 deans stared at Lewis in a serious atmosphere, comparable to interrogation. Oh, and Filch, this guy is looking at Lewis with excitement, as if hoping to see Lewis severely punished. "Sorry, 2 professors, I don't know what's going on." Lewis acted innocent. "I just went to bed as usual and got up, but I didn't notice anything special about Malfoy them." "Nothing special?" He must have been lying to the professors. We all smelled that stench of urine, and he couldn't have failed to notice. Filch spoke first, but Professor Snape's expression was a little ugly after he said this. This. Is bedwetting abnormal?" Lewis asked, glancing at Filch. Filch suddenly fell silent and had nothing to say. Lewis smiled slightly, made a note of this Filch, and said to the 2 professors, "Why don't you ask the parties directly? Maybe they know something, or maybe they're just playing too late." Mr. Malfoy's first words before waking up were, "Don't eat me," which didn't seem like a matter of playing too late. Professor McGonagall said. "Maybe a nightmare?" "Children, it's normal." Lewis laughed. The 2 professors looked at Lewis with strange expressions, and said in their hearts that you are not also a child. Although the professors suspected that this matter was related to Lewis, there was no evidence, not to mention that there was no bad incident, and those students also woke up one after another in the hospital, so the matter was closed. "Well, Mr. Wilson, you can go back." Since there was no evidence, the 2 professors no longer kept Lewis here. Only Filch looked regretful that he could not see or even participate in the punishment of the students. The handcuffs hanging from the ceiling in his office had been idle for a long time. "By the way, Mr. Wilson, please come to the headmaster's office during your lunch break. Headmaster Dumbledore is waiting for you." Before Lewis left, Professor Snape told him, "The password is Be Candy." "Good, Professor." Still maintaining a warm professional smile, Lewis turned and left the office. Following Professor McGonagall back to the Transfiguration classroom, the morning class was over, but Professor McGonagall still needed to assign homework. In the next class, I will check everyone's match needle progress, and if they don't qualify, they will need to go to my office and lock them up. Professor McGonagall warned the group of young wizards not to play crazy when they were not in class. In addition, everyone needs to turn in an article on the specifications and precautions for the use of transfiguration charms, and check them together in the next class. There was a whale in the classroom, writing articles where it was interesting to practice magic. For them, practicing magic was equivalent to no homework, but writing articles was solid homework. Mr. Wilson. Professor McGonagall glanced at Lewis. You don't have to do homework, but you still have to be assessed in the next class. Okay, Professor McGonagall. Lewis nodded. After class, Professor McGonagall left, and Harry immediately ran to Lewis's side to find out the news. If you have any questions about the other Gryffindor students, I don't think anyone knows the situation better than them. Lewis flipped his hand, and a top hat suddenly appeared in his hand, without the slightest fold on the surface. Harry was taken aback by the sudden appearance of the top hat. See you in potions in the afternoon. Lewis put on his top hat and dashingly left. If I were you'd read books. After all, the dean of our house likes to find fault with other house students. Ron pouted beside Harry as he watched Lewis leave dashingly, and jealousy made him say beyond recognition, "Oh my god, he really likes to be in the limelight. You see those girls, they are all confused by his little tricks." Harry turned his head to look after hearing this, and sure enough, the first-year girls in the two houses were basically staring at Lewis's back. "That's no small measure," Harry said. "Did you see his movements?" "No," Ronnie said deflatedly. "I heard George say it seemed like magic in the Muggle world. Not true. I'm sure I'll find a flaw." "Then you work hard." Harry smiled helplessly. He knew that Lewis was a family of magicians, and the magic tricks performed were difficult to see through. But now he was more concerned about what happened to Slytherin, and he felt that it had nothing to do with Lewis. He wondered how powerful this wizard who had lived in the Muggle world since he had been growing up like him was. It is not difficult to inquire about this matter, or it is even more difficult to find the one closest to the truth from a bunch of exaggerated news, because this matter has long been spread all over the world. Because when sending Slytherin students to the hospital, Professor McGonagall subconsciously asked students from her house to go to Slytherin to lift people. And those Gryffindors were unlucky at the sight of their rivals, smiling one by one like a holiday, but they did not dare to show too obviously under Professor McGonagall's gaze. But after lifting the Slytherin students out of Professor McGonagall's sight, they let go of themselves, all kinds of arrangements. That mouth is not at all immoral. Coupled with the Gryffindor tradition of no secrets, soon the whole school knew about various versions of the fall of Slytherin. That's right, the word fall is used, because in most people's opinion, Slytherin was attacked by one person. Everyone knew that the Muggle wizard Lewis Wilson had entered Slytherin, and the next day the Muggle wizard walked out of Slytherin and went to class safely, and the Slytherin pureblood wizards were unconscious one by one. It's like a righteous knight walking into the tiger's den alone and walking out safely after continuously picking out the wolf, tiger and dragon. This romantic and legendary story style makes the name Lewis fiercely brush the existence at Hogwarts. Even if there is no evidence, even if Lewis denies it when those wizards come to the door to ask, everyone likes to accept this version. Another well-known version is the incident in which Malfoy was scared to pee. Because saying that people are beaten to urinate sounds unhygienic, not in line with the hero's experience. You can't bathe the dragon's den after other heroes after the battle, bathe people in urine here, right? So Malfoy's pants pee was incorporated into the nightmare version. Some people say that Lewis is a wizard with nightmare blood. He manipulated terrible dreams to attack the Slytherin wizards, immersing them in fear and despair, and then Malfoy was scared to pee. This is probably the closest to the real version, but only a handful of Malfoy haters are discussing this, and others prefer to believe the first one. Episode 43. While the embarrassing deeds of Slytherin were being discussed all over Hogwarts, Lewis Wilson, the core task of the incident, had arrived at the door of the headmaster's office. Two majestic statues of alien beasts blocked the position of the staircase. "Be candy." Lewis read the command, and the two alien beasts immediately moved to give way to the stairs leading to the principal's office. This magic version of the automatic door is very interesting. It should be a transfiguration charm, right? I just don't know how to drive it. Lewis thought as he walked up the stairs and soon arrived at the headmaster's room, where Lewis first felt like a lot of books. It looks like a miniature library, with walls replaced by shelves filled with unrepetitive books, only a few gaps, and portraits of some people. The portraits were moving, and everyone was a dead headmaster of Hogwarts, staring at Lewis with a lot of meaning. Another eye-catching bird is the bird squatting on a plane tree branch and growing to taste the tailed crow with a fiery red belt. This thing is probably the phoenix, which noticed Lewis's gaze and turned its head to look at him. Finally, Lewis noticed that the old man sitting behind the desk, even if it was a legendary wizard, he was not particularly outstanding in appearance, and it was not worth mentioning compared to those books and phoenixes, but from the appearance, he was just a kind old man. However, this kind old man is likely to be the culprit of Harry Potter's tragic childhood before he was 11. Headmaster Dumbledore, good afternoon. Lewis took off his top hat and said hello. Hello, Mr. Wilson, please sit. Dumbledore invited, pointing to the chair in front of the table. After Lewis sat down, Dumbledore prepared a cup for Lewis only with nothing in it. Want something to drink? Dumbledore asked. Can you conjure it if I say sparkling water? Lewis asked rhetorically. Of course not, Mr. Wilson, you should know that magic can't conjure up food, and the sparkling water you said should be a Muggle drink, Hogwarts doesn't. Are there 5 exceptions to the basic law of Gamp transformation? I read it in books. Lewis shrugged. Magic is strange, some places are terrifyingly convenient, but in others it has strange restrictions. This is a warning to us that wizards cannot do whatever they want. Dumbledore smiled. How about some milk tea? I have no opinion. A cup of fragrant milk tea appeared in front of Lewis, mellow and rich. You have a lot of books here, Lewis said, smelling the mellow aroma of milk tea. At first glance, I thought you were Ravenclaw. Knowledge is a walking stick to aid adventure, and no one will dislike too much knowledge. Dumbledore laughed, but most of the books here are given to me by old friends, and they give me a bunch of books every time there is a holiday, but I don't really want that many books. So what do you want? Wool socks? Lewis said casually. Dumbledore's expression moved, and he looked at Lewis meaningfully. Let's talk about your compensation, Mr. Wilson. Dumbledore said, we almost missed Hogwarts, and the problem is quite serious. What is the school going to compensate me? Lewis asked. I don't care how serious the problem is, after all, it has been remedied, but I will not give up compensation. You're honest, Mr. Wilson. Dumbledore nodded. I'm sorry, the school can't compensate you too much, those are all education funds from the school trustee that can't be used elsewhere, but Hogwarts has some unused surplus materials for teaching, if you don't dislike it, you can give them some. It sounds like a job of getting Lewis to clean up the trash, but it's actually a good compensation. Every year, Hogwarts buys magical materials and supplies for teaching equipment from wizards around the world, and the amount of these things is often saturated, and there will be a surplus every year. These are good things of great value, even if they are pulled out for processing, they can sell for at least 90% off. But this did not attract Lewis. He smiled and said to Dumbledore, Headmaster Dumbledore, I have an opinion. What you think? Tell me, Mr. Wilson, this conversation is a discussion, not a notification. Dumbledore was polite. Hogwarts has been around for hundreds of years, and I think there will always be some items in some neglected corners of this castle that no one cares about. Lewis took a sip of mellow milk tea. I want a promise, these items I found at Hogwarts belong to me. This? Lewis's request made the wise Dumbledore unable to finish, and he didn't think about the meaning of Lewis doing this for time. Don't worry, I won't touch other people's things, any, persons, items on campus, I will never touch them, and if people outside the school accidentally find that the items I found are their past things, they can also redeem them with galleons. Lewis put down his teacup and said. Dumbledore hesitated for a long time before saying, I have imagined a lot of the outcome of our conversation, but your request still overwhelms me a little, but since you have made such a request and handled it properly, then I, as the headmaster of Hogwarts, agree to your request. Don't worry, Mr. Headmaster, I haven't finished my request yet. Lewis observed Dumbledore's expression, trying to analyze his attitude to this request from his expression, but to no avail. He could only continue, I also want the right to freely enter and exit the forbidden book area. This won't work. Dumbledore refused without hesitation. Mr. Wilson, I heard about what happened in Slytherin. Your strength and mind are indeed able to go to the forbidden book area to find those dangerous books you need, but you are still too young. Maybe we can discuss this matter after the 3rd year. With Dumbledore's credit, he would not perfunctory Lewis, but Lewis didn't want to run up and swim at night when he had nothing to do. Although Lewis doesn't know magic, he is still very curious about related knowledge. As the saying goes, knowing oneself and knowing each other is invincible. The wizard's means are too bizarre. What if he accidentally gets in? Mr. Headmaster, it is difficult to stop a person's curiosity, even if you don't give me the right to enter and exit the forbidden book area. It's just a hassle for me, isn't it? It's better to be fair and know which books I've read, right? Lewis said with a smile. Episode 44. What you said makes sense. Dumbledore nodded, his clear eyes looking at Lewis, who immediately lowered his gaze not to look at him. How is Mr. Wilson and Mr. Potter? Dumbledore asked. It's okay, it's a neighbor after all. Lewis opened his eyes and said nonsense, although he was a neighbor, but he had always been far away from Harry Potter before he awakened the system, for fear of getting involved. Mr. Potter is a very worthy friend, I know his parents, and Mr. Potter is more kind than his father when he was a child, but he still lacks a little strength. After all, he has lived without magic since he was a child. Dumbledore said. I will help him if there is any difficulty in studying. Lewis said, as a friend. Very well, then Mr. Wilson, we are on an agreement. Dumbledore bowed his head and wrote a note, give this to Mrs. Pants of the library, she'll understand. Lewis took the note and hid it with his hand. Beautiful technique, Mr. Wilson, I heard that your father and grandfather were both magicians, and it seems that your magic skills are not low. Dumbledore praised. It's just a little trick that's not worth mentioning. Lewis frowned imperceptibly and looked at the phoenix on the side. First the phoenix's eyes fell directly on the sleeve of his hidden note, and then Dumbledore, his gaze was suddenly reminded by someone. Just now, the bird saw through his magic technique, and while it saw through its own technique, it seemed to make Dumbledore see through it simultaneously. He seemed to be able to communicate with the phoenix without barriers, and he could borrow the phoenix's perspective. Some difficult, the phoenix's eyesight is afraid to be stronger than the eagle's dynamic vision, no matter how complex the magic tricks can't escape its eyes, which can't escape Dumbledore's eyes, maybe putting the note directly into the storage space can avoid being discovered. Lewis resisted the idea of trying, the fixed-point teleportation ring is his most important prop, he doesn't want to be exposed because of any possibility, now the props in his hand are not enough, and there is a great chance of being found without the cover of foreign objects. There is no need to expose too much for the sake of a single reward. There was no reward for the debunked scam, not to mention that with both spectators seeing through, Lewis got up to say goodbye and left the principal's office. After Lewis left, Dumbledore was silent for a while and asked, what do you think, what is his purpose? He was answered by an old man with a goatee, his name and the year of birth and death hanging under his portrait. Blake, Phineas Nigels, 1847 to 1926. A difficult little ghost, it is difficult to see through his mind, look at his eyes, and the dripping has not stopped. The Slytherin of the Black family exclaimed. It's hard to imagine that this is a Muggle wizard, he was born to belong to Slytherin. You should abandon your ridiculous bloodline theory as soon as possible, and your descendants are now in Azkaban. In the portrait opposite Phineas, a lady holding a thick oak wand waved her wand menacingly. Apparently she used that thing as a melee weapon. Rude guy. Phineas muttered, not daring to let the other party hear, because the other party was really beating, and it hurt all the time. He's really smart, and he has the strength to support his intelligence. The former headmaster, Amando Dipet, lowered his eyes and said, but it's not necessarily a good thing, just like that person. At the mention of that person, all portraits fell silent. But this Mr. Wilson is better enough, he is honest enough, he is very open to his purpose, which is reassuring enough. Headmistress Daisy Devante said. Let's keep observing, he's only an 11-year-old kid. What if you don't observe? Do something to him? He hasn't done anything wrong, and he can't be punished for being smart. Phineas shook his head. Dumbledore nodded, wait and see, maybe he will surprise us. Or frightened. A good teacher-student meeting somehow turned into a transaction. Lewis felt a little strange, because Dumbledore seemed to treat him as an adult worthy of attention, and would exchange the right to freely enter and exit the forbidden book area for him to help Harry Potter. Looks like it's a bit big to throw all the boys in Slytherin into nightmares. Lewis shook his head, in. After eating lunch with Hermione, who had made an appointment, and once again finalizing the decision to go to the library after class, Lewis returned to the dormitory to meet his roommates with pale faces and strange expressions. They looked at each other, with an irreparable vigilance in their eyes, even Malfoy and his two henchmen were far apart. Although their memories have been deleted, the reincarnation-like torture has made them almost form conditioned reflexes. You know, in last night's illusion, the classmates around them will become clowns at any time to hunt them down, and now although they can't remember the specific content of the illusion, the conditioned reflexes they have cultivated are still there. It is estimated that it will take at least half a month for them to calm that fear. The culprit, Lewis, just glanced at them and returned to his bed. The dormitory had been cleaned by the house elves, and naturally there was no strange smell. Lewis opened the cage, released Fafnir, fed him a little nut and planned to take it out for a walk. In the past 2 days, just eating and not exercising, Fafnir has a tendency to gain weight, which is not good, and I still expect it to send letters in the future. After releasing Fafnir, Lewis took the book and headed to the potions classroom, ready to start the most dangerous course for him. But don't be too anxious for the time being. According to what Hermione said at lunch, the first lesson is mainly about the preparation and processing of potions materials, and does not involve specific practical operations. Lewis arrived early, at least an hour before class, and there was no one in the dimly lit classroom. This is just right. Lewis rummaged through the lockers next to the door of the potions classroom he hadn't been to once. This is the place to put away unimportant teaching equipment, such as old crucibles as substitutes, and potions textbooks for careless little wizards. Then, Lewis found a special, tattered 6th year NEWT textbook, Advanced Potions Making. Episode 45. Look there, the Half-Blood Prince's notes. Lewis patted the dust on the book and turned the first page. This book belongs to the Half-Blood Prince, and Snape had 2 middle schools to lead this kind of writing, and more importantly, he left it, if only I had disposed of it 800 years earlier. Lewis shook his head and began to quickly flip through the notes on the notebook. During this process, Lewis could feel the trembling of the Sharingan eye in his left eye. Since the last injection, the mental power instantly enhanced the potion release illusion. This replica Sharingan eye was somewhat unstable, and it was estimated that it would explode in a while. He needed to find an alternative to illusion as soon as possible. It took Louis 10 minutes to read the entire book, and the revised notes were remembered clearly. As for the spell of Divine Shadow Wufeng, although Lewis can't use it, he also wrote it down, and he can give it to others for self-defense. Putting the book back in place, Lewis sat down in a place that was not easily seen, ready to continue the draw. Another high-quality 10-in-a-row draw. This boutique lottery, a total of 10 times, consumption of fraud points, 5,000 points remaining, 14,320. Golden light flashed in front of his eyes, and one item fell in front of Lewis, and then he quickly put it into the storage space. After all, this is a public place, so be careful not to be seen by others. You obtained sundries, Death Crystal *1, Dragon's Blood Body Wash *1. You have obtained skill class, Teleportation *1. You obtained the enhancement class, Concentrated Spirit Body Mutagenesis Fluid *3, Gene Enhancement Potion, Bird, 1, Chi Magic Seed 1. You get special class items, Sherlock Holmes Pipe *1, Medge's Soul Stealing Scroll *1. Detailed items were thrown into the space, and Lewis began sorting them by value and function. The first is the first appearance of the classification, skill, teleportation. Or rather, this thing should be a summoner skill. That's right, this skill comes from a game called League of Legends, which allows the hero you control to choose their own target and teleport, and the unit, except for buildings, that is used as the target during teleportation will be invincible. In reality, teleportation can select a person or object, and by activating the skill, it will be teleported to that location after 4 seconds, during which the object or person will be invincible. At the same time, this ability can not only act on Lewis but also on any target under Lewis's control, such as Lewis controlling a puppet and teleporting it to a designated location. A practical skill that combines mobility and protection. If Lewis wants to protect someone, he only needs to mark the opponent to quickly teleport when he learns that the opponent is in danger, and after 4 seconds of invincibility, he appears to blast the enemy. The only drawback is that he does not see the danger and safety of the person being marked, and requires the other party's active contact, which may be the only drawback of this skill. And then there are the 2 things of the sundries class. A death crystal that sounds very gimmicky, and a particularly strange-looking shower gel from the Dragon's Den. Death crystals, magical crystals that allow the holder to see their own death screen. Note that they are active and affect the holder and even manipulate the holder. The death crystal is from the anime Rick and Morty. It has little effect, and it is also quite dangerous, and it belongs to the waste of this lottery. But it's good to torture people. I remember Harry's little henchman seems to have a mouse coming. Go back and throw this to it. Lewis held the death crystal, and the vision in front of him split into countless small pieces, but each piece was blank and there was no scene. That's because of Lewis's immortal nature, and the death crystal can't sense Lewis's death. Temporarily throwing the crystal into the storage space, Lewis set his sights on another suspected scrap reward. Dragon's Blood Shower Gel? This thing doesn't sound very reliable. But after reading its introduction, Lewis found himself sloppy. Dragon's Blood Shower Gel, the latest product of the industrial laboratory of another world, using flesh and blood magic to synthesize dragon blood. The dragon in the laboratory has not been injured by skin and flesh so far, and each quantitative use can slightly increase the flame resistance and physical resistance of the skin. Although the wording is very careful, using trace amounts, this bottle of shower gel looks at least 1 or 200 liters, which is the amount that can send a normal person away. Good things, put them away first, and try them at night. Lewis plans to go back and get some small bottles to give his parents a little. This thing has no use requirements and is very suitable for them to add a little self-protection ability. Then there are the enhanced items that Lewis is most looking forward to. The strengthening props of the ordinary lottery look good, and the enhanced items of this boutique lottery should not be much worse. Concentrated mental body mutagen liquid. It is forbidden to take it internally or inject. Minors, please use it under the guard of the explosives disposal team. How to use. Soak the head. After use, it will greatly strengthen the user's mental body, and the user's physical strength is not enough to cause an explosion. Although this lottery did not bring Lewis the illusion that he wanted most, it brought him more powerful mental power enhancement props, although it seemed a little dangerous, but Lewis with the power of horse charms and dog charms was not afraid of that danger at all. With the concentrated psychic mutagenic fluid put away, Lewis planned to take time out of the bathroom in the evening to try it. Gene Enhancement Agent. Birds. A gene enhancement agent for ornithodes that removes some redundant genes and strengthens gene expression of muscles, bones, and feathers. Chi Magic Seed. The beginning of Chi Magic. Chi Magic. Achieve the desired result through self and natural Chi, combining rituals and materials with the basic knowledge of Chi Magic. Another genetically enhanced potion, but this time Lewis can also use it. Fafnir is just a dragon but does not have the physique of a dragon, hoping that this genetic potion will make it stronger. Then there is the Chi Magic Seed, which Lewis initially thought was related to the magic of the Harry Potter world, and after reading the introduction, he realized that it was from the same place as the 12 charms. Chi magic is a unique power of that world, from the immortal gods and demons to ordinary wizards. It is all magic with the heaven and earth energy of Chi as the core. And this thing is clear about good and evil. Good people use righteous Chi, bad people use black Chi. Lewis just thought for a moment and decided to absorb this thing.